All right, so welcome to the introduction to the Interaction Styles Certification. This is an online certification, and my goals here are to give you enough of an understanding of what we're doing to know if you want to know more, and at the same time give you some hints and things about some very important pieces around setting up safety. So the objectives that were in the materials that we offered before in our promotional materials were how can you increase buy-in and engagement with your work with personality lenses. And while I'm on that one, let me just be really clear, this is not at all about the letters of the Myers-Briggs type code. So we're not going to use those right now. Clearly in our program, we will show how the interaction styles relate to the Myers-Briggs type indicator results and the Jungian theory that's really behind the construction of that instrument. But there are multiple personality lenses, and most of them are pretty good if they're not overly simplistic. And so that, they all, but these are three particular lenses that we use, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But the thing is, it's important to have buy-in, to have some sense of people wanting to know. If they don't want to know, then you're going to get some resistances, and you want them to be really engaged with what you're doing. And then how can you present typology information in ways that minimize stereotyping, and then they keep the door open for agility and development? Is one of the biggest problems we have with any kind of typology is that people tend to use it, and it's just natural. You learn that there are dogs and cats, and when you're a baby, when you're just learning to talk, and then you see things that look, you call a cat a dog because you have a dog, and they're both furry, and there's enough similarity. And when you start to label and name, it can have you're going to get some resistance from a whole lot of people, and a whole lot more people recently than in recent years than we used to. There's just a great deal of resistance to being labeled and categorized. And what happens is that when you do that, type becomes the story, that type category becomes the story people tell themselves about who they are and what they can and can't do. And it's not necessarily that they can't, but I'll get to that later. So what you want is, what's most important at this point in time is, one of the most important things is the agility that comes from understanding who you are and where you come from naturally, so that you can overcome those biases, and that's what we're after. And then how do you support people to develop from where they are to where they want to go if you don't have this buy-in and this safety? And then, of course, I want to answer this question: how can the interaction style certifications help you even more? So we're going to cover basic setup and framing for safety and buy-in, and you'll experience it, and I'll talk a little bit about why we do it that way, and what we did and why we do it that way. And this is part of the facilitation guide. It's the whole thing's 500 pages, but for when we give you just a part of it, you get about a third of that. That is a scripted dialogue, and in the certification, that's some of what you get. So, but we talk about what we did and why we did it that way, and in the workshop as well. But we're going to cover the little bit of that so you know the rationale. Then an overview of multiple models, and that approach to wholeness and why we use multiple models. And then how we're doing the certification and why we're doing it that way. We're starting off with a one-on-one session, and that's going to have to hurry up and happen this next week. Workshop sessions, and in between the workshop sessions, there's homework and practice. And then talk a little bit about what you get and what your commitment is. So here we go. Here's some really important things. It all starts with you. You have to know where you fit in the models. If you don't know where you fit and you can't describe yourself, and the ways that you look like the stereotypes that go with that, or the ways that you don't, so you can explain. Like we used to say, I have one essential motivator pattern with the other one rising, because there's always this development piece. We'll talk about that. So it starts with you and with you knowing yourself well. And then there's the other piece is contracting. It's very important in your agreement with your clients that you can be really clear about what you can do. And we're not going to cover contracting in this segment, but it's just important to know about how do you set the models for safety. It turns out that one of the most important things for people working together is safety. And the most effective teams from the study they did at Google, so just a landmark study, showed that safety was the number one thing for when people can work together. And so if you want to use typology, you need to be constantly aware of what it takes to make this kind of information safe. And then you want to use the models in your work to meet the needs and the perspectives of everybody. So you want to apply it yourself to how you design, how you talk to other people, how you relate to your clients. And as you can tell, as I'm talking about your clients, the assumption is that these are things that you're wanting to do to use in your practice. Okay, so I think using typology models is one of the keys to releasing wholeness. We're born whole. You know, part of you doesn't come in, and then, your arm doesn't get added later, it comes in. You come in with whatever it is you have when you're born, it's all there. And the template for it is there. And and so wholeness is a pretty trendy term right now in the business world anyway. And so there's a whole idea about we need to be whole at work. Let's have the whole person come to work. And how can you bring yourself all of that to work if you don't know more about yourself? And that's what we can do to help other people. So it's there from the beginning, and it gets lost because we go into environments where we're not allowed to be ourselves. And so what we can do here is if we identify unconscious operating systems. So in my view, a typology is an unconscious operating system. It's a template that has a core driver. It isn't some characteristics that got added up or that show up in some kind of emerging behavioral pattern. It's an organized system. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we use the self-discovery process because no matter what method you use, there's error rate. If you use an instrument of some kind, it's not going to be 100% accurate on everything that it tries to measure. We are complex human beings. Well, we're human complex systems, to put it in one way. And so because we're complex, asking you a few questions about do you prefer this over that isn't really going to get you to an accurate fit 100% of the time. Maybe anywhere from 50 to 75% of the time you'll get a good fit. In a group self-discovery process, I'd say we get maybe 75% of the time. And in one-on-ones with me, usually we get to about 95% of the time a good fit. So, some people are really, a lot of experience. I wouldn't be the only person that can get those kinds of results. So we integrate multiple data points, and that's a really important consideration. We need to recognize the rules of our complexity and get comfort in ourselves so we can shift our behavior. And that's something we want for ourselves as professionals using this, but we also want it for our clients. And we use multiple models for flexible adaptation, and that's especially as practitioners. You can overwhelm your clients if you give them too much. So we've developed some things that help people get with these integrated multiple models. And then as a practitioner, you need to provide some applications and make it relevant. And the sooner the better. And that is where I come to that knowledge accrues to skill. I remember this is one of the things that David Kersey, my early professor and mentor, said. He wanted to change the whole school system and teach skills because that's how you get knowledgeable. I got knowledgeable by teaching. and facilitating. So that's the whole certification program is about skill, and it also speaks to the relevance, having it people doing something and then finding out more about who they are as they're doing it. So who are you really? Oh, I think I already touched on this already, ahead of myself. So anyway, do you use instruments? Well, that's okay. It's only a data point though, and the context in which people take that instrument really makes a big difference in terms of whether or not people are thinking about themselves. If you take an instrument of some kind in a work setting, you wind up thinking about who you are in that kind of a context. And so that frame of reference, how safe you feel, all of those things have to do with how accurate an instrument is, let alone how well researched it is and how well the items work or the process works. Self-discovery process, well, that alone will work with a lot of people. And I found that some people don't have enough self-awareness at this point in their lives to be that accurate. Another thing that's really important is good descriptions. And we've developed these narrative descriptions based on interviews, and they were written in the language of the people, of the types, and we said, what's it like to be you? We worked hard on them, and we get really good results with these narrative descriptions. A few bullet points doesn't do it. And then, of course, there's always this process of development and verification. And so that as people go through, they continually verify. And whoops, what's going on here? So, see this road? This is what self-discovery is about. It's an ongoing journey, not a destination. Now, it does not mean that your innate type preferences don't, that they stay completely static. The preferences are there, but your behavior may change, and the skill and the degree of development of these different aspects of your personality can change. But what I mean by this is when you put people on this journey, when they join you on a journey for themselves, you don't just, it's not a one and done. So you take an instrument, that's your type, or you go through a self-discovery process and that's your pattern. And so it's a continual exploration, and I've had many instances where I've done workshops where people are really tuning in and participating, and they think at the end of the 5 days even, or 6 days even, they wind up going away, and they talk to me later, a year later maybe, they say, you know what, I thought I had these preferences and I have this other set. Now usually it's just one or two aspects that's a little bit off, but anyway, it is, so here we have this idea as you're doing application activities, keep that door open for the journey. Okay, so a little map of the territory. This is based on the work of Ken Wilber. It's called the Wilber Matrix. I found it a really useful diagnostic category, diagnostic tool for what's going on. But I want us to think about all the many aspects of who you are and what makes up the wholeness that's you. And very often what we look to is behaviors. And behaviors, yeah, behaviors are important. They're an indicator of some, maybe a good indicator of your personality preferences and your personal patterns, but they're not all of it. The other thing that we sometimes look at and forget to look at actually is the environment and the systems. And that's external, meaning other people can see it, and it's collective, meaning it's the group. So we have this external environment that can, that really makes a difference and that we are in. So that's a very important aspect of our wholeness as we interact to and contribute to those environmental systems. A structure like an org chart is one of them, the way a room is arranged, the way the things are arranged on your screen, all of those kinds of things. All right, so another aspect is relationships and culture. And so the way we express our personality patterns is often through and in our relationships. And it's interesting, there's a constancy that shows up in our relationships, and yet there is a context of those relationships. So we're both shaped by, in any instance, our relationships and what we call the collective, the culture, and we shape and contribute to. So it's not totally in isolation. What personality patterns, personal patterns I've been calling them recently, what they contribute to the most is helping us understand how we're likely to make meaning of something, how we interpret. This is where consciousness lives. And it's where we can become increasingly aware of our own meaning-making systems so that we're not caught up in it. So that's a map of the territory that's really important for us to think about as we're helping people discover more about who they are. And these things I'm sharing with you today apply to more than interaction styles as a lens. They apply to all of it. So. All right, now let's see. What I want to share with you is what are some of the things we do to get ready, to set the stage for engagement. Some of these you can do in pre-work, in a pre-meeting if you're doing live facilitation. Some of them you'll do in the workshop. I will tell you that if you don't do most of these things I'm going to share with you, don't bother doing the work. It will do harm. It's very, very important, and I'll try to point out the ones that are, I think, the most important. Okay, so feel free to type your questions into chat and your comments as we go along. Okay, so reality and perception. Here's the deal. If you had little plastic pieces of plastic to look through, you can imagine yourself doing that. Now imagine you had some more. Now what happens here? You can see that, and I would elicit some responses from my participants. These are filters. We have all kinds of filters. And if I ask you what kinds of filters, you could say culture, you could say the environment, you could say generation, all kinds of filters that we now know about that we maybe didn't know about in earlier generations. The good news is with little plastic filters, you can take them down because you have them. So what we're going to do today is explore some filters that you have. And that's what I would say. Just a little thing. I like using real plastic filters in the workshop. And here's the problem with the world. It's a friend of mine, Dr. Sue Cooper, said, Linda, the problem is everybody has BLM syndrome. And I agree 100%. Be like me. We all go around expecting other people to be like us. And when they're not, you know what's wrong with them, right? They're mad. They're mad as in crazy. They're lazy. They're being bad, stupid, all kinds of names we might call them because they're not like us. And the other problem that we have is we have BLT, be like them. So we're often operating out of BLM or out of BLT. So this is an important thing that just kind of gets at what we're doing and a way to set up the frame. And the thing is that this be like me never goes away. It's incurable, but we can alleviate the symptoms. And when we get tired and stressed, it will come back. And just even if you've shared that much, if you're around people and you're working and they can say, Linda, I think that's a case of BLM. And then all we have to do is laugh. What else can you do? Okay, so I'm going to move along here. So some things I looked about with personality, and this is really, I think, some important stuff to get across with people, how you decide to do it. It's about the theme and the pattern of behavior. So what is a pattern? Pattern is one of the essential qualities of a living system if you want to understand it. pattern rules everything. It's the thing that stays the same throughout your life. So we have that, which is, if I had you on audio, I would be having you say a shrub. Some people would say a leaf lettuce, a pile of leaves, and someone would say the top of a tree, and they'd of course know that this was tricky because of where I put it, but you know it's a tree. The only way you know it's the top of the tree is that you have to recognize the whole pattern. So human systems, living the systems, are characterized by having first and foremost patterns. Now they have processes too, which are the activities that go on to help maintain the pattern. And they also have a certain structure, which is that physical embodiment of the pattern. So it's very important to realize and convey to your participants or your clients that what we're looking at here are patterns, not that have themes, not bits and pieces put together. Because if you put it together, it's not like Tinker Toys where you can, or Legos where you can assemble them in a certain way. They're organized, and they're organized for a purpose. All right, so what else do we have to say? Well, it's about how we've always been and how we're different. So I usually have somebody do something around this, how we've always been, by crossing their arms, and then which one went on top, now turn it around and do the other side. Just to see that there are things that have been there with them from the beginning. And it's how we're different. So let's take a look at this. So we have an acorn and a pine cone. And if you plant that acorn, you're going to get an oak tree. And if you plant the pine cone, you're going to get a pine tree. You're not going to get a pine tree out of an acorn unless you've got genetically modified something or other. So, and with all the stuff around genetically modified things, sometimes that's really not a good thing. So, but sometimes it happens that we have some things that get affected by chemicals and things in our environment. So we have this difference, it's always there. And you notice that in the beginning, you have the acorn, right? And it is a much different pattern once it starts to grow. It starts to have, the whole pattern starts to emerge. So very early on, the pattern isn't exactly what it is once it has reached its full patternness, if you will. And you might talk about what are the essential qualities of trees, and trees are, they have a single trunk, a branching structure, roots, of course, and different kinds of means to exchange oxygen, CO2, things like that. So those are the essential qualities. If it doesn't have a single trunk, it isn't a tree. It's a shrub. And a palm tree is not a tree, it's a grass. That's what I was told. Okay, so understanding these essential qualities is what we're trying to do with the personality patterns. I don't always go into that depth with clients unless they're pretty scientific. What I'm really trying to convey, and it's important for you to understand as practitioners, that we're looking at the pattern. Okay, so it's also about how we're alike and how we're unique. So here we have these trees, right? They're all the same kind of tree, but given the experiences they've had in life, they're different. So they maintain their uniqueness. Now, these things I've been saying have a lot to do with safety. People don't want to lose their uniqueness. And yet we can see that they may have some similarities with other people. All right, and it's how we grow and develop. And if you share nothing else out of this, I would hope you would share this. Now, this is an activity I use. I'm not going to have you do it, and I do it in this particular way. So I tell people to listen carefully, and I want you to write your name with your left hand, and then I'll say write your name with your right hand. And then after that, I ask the question, as I would in this poll if we were able to do it with this system. If they wrote their name with their left hand and they wrote their name with the right hand, and almost always everybody raises their hand. So if we have 10 participants, there'll be 10 hands go up. I had some skill writing with my left hand. I would say you might have about 6 people. And with the right hand, you might have about 10 people, because maybe they, for whatever reason. And then I say, How many of you are left-handed? And maybe 3 people say that they're left-handed. That's unusual, but they might, just for numbers' sake. And 7 would say they're right-handed. Well, then how is it that you with the left-handed, there were so many who had some skill with the right hand? How did you get that skill? You got that skill because you practiced, right? Yeah, right. Okay, so let's see. You can find other ways to do this. You can talk about being left-footed and right-footed and how do you kick a soccer ball. I wouldn't try that one myself, but anyway, this is the piece that's really important. Understanding the whole self. There's the innate core self. This is the template, like that acorn has the template for what that tree is going to be. And so what we have here is this innate core self. It's the template for how, if you want to look at the brain will emerge, you know, there's still always an environmental influence, but it's that template for wherever it comes from, whether it's genetic. We know there's some genetic qualities. We know there's some other qualities that some people might say come from spirit or from purpose on the planet, whatever that might be. Current behavior, that's another aspect of yourself. You're sitting here watching the screen, perhaps doing a few other things, but we have this behavior that you're doing, and that's your contextual self. And this is where you're most adaptable, where you have this context that may require things that don't go with this innate core self. And you can adapt and respond. All right, so if you do that enough, you may wind up with, whoops, hang on, what did I just do? With adapting to those pressures from the external environment and growing from the pressure from the internal environment. So this innate core self has in it a pattern for growth, just like your bodies develop in a certain way. Gross motor skills develop before fine motor skills, for example. So that's there to begin with. The pattern for that development is there, and there is a push to develop, and that is your developed self. And I like to tell people that who you really are is your developed self. That's the real you. And how you develop and grow and adapt is all of you. The core self is also a very important aspect of your wholeness that you may not have known about. We don't go around teaching this. Although I did have a good friend who would use the plain English everyday language to talk to her children to help them understand herself, such that her son went up to a 4th grade teacher and said, Miss whatever, I really would have rather have I learn better if I talk with people than if I have to sit and do homework, paperwork all the time. So, you can become conversant about all of that. We think about the writing activity. That's use. That's what you did. We think about skill. That's your nurture. That comes in the developed self. And this preference or talent, like naturally right-handed or different kinds of talents that are there, are what is nature. And there is some of nature in all of us, and there is a great deal of nurture in all of us. And my understanding is that, yes, we can consciously change how we think about things and our habitual behaviors. And that if you want to change the way the brain works, it takes work. It isn't just, I'm going to think differently. So all of these are very important understandings about this. And why we're doing this work is that we don't know the vocabulary for understanding what are the patterns of this innate core self. One more thing to look at, and that is this. We have 3, I made this PowerPoint, it's 3 ovals, but it's 3 shadows. Now, what are the things that you think those are shadows of? All right. Well, you probably thought for sure a sphere. Did you know that a cone makes that shadow sometimes? And did you know that a cylinder does? And so the reason I like to talk about this one, this is another one that I think is really important, is that, first of all, when we're looking at someone's behavior, all we have to go on is their behavior. That's the shadowy stuff, not like the shadow aspect of personality, but the behavior that you can see. And we also have to keep in mind that we can exhibit the behavior of different personality patterns. If the context is right, it evokes it from us. If we've practiced it, it might become pretty habitual and we might do it very easily. So what's behind the behavior, you don't always know what's behind the behavior, and we have the flexibility and adaptability. Now, if we look at this shadow, this shape, and we see that it's capable of producing another shadow, no matter what your natural innate personality patterns are, this is what I call the constant core, no matter what it is, you always have some capacity for flexibility and adaptability. And it's up to you about how you choose to adapt many times. And sometimes it's all you can do. Sometimes the environment is so coercive that that's all you do. All right. So that's the work of coaches and therapists, I suppose, to remove some of the blocks to getting back to the core as well as the adaptability. Okay, one more thing, the thing about self-discovery, there's these guys named Joe and Harry, created a map for communication. And so I think it's a good map for us to think about. There's the public knowledge, what we see and hear, known to self, known to others. If we all know about it, it's a lot easier to talk about it. So just knowing about your personality patterns and what the core drivers are or what your talents are and knowing that about your colleagues and your friends and your family make it a lot easier to talk about, let alone accept. Unknown to self and known to others, well, there are some things we don't know about ourselves. Some things that we just take for granted and we assume everybody does it. So that is this area which we call feedback. Because that's how we learn about ourselves. We learn about ourselves through interacting with others. So if we have the feedback from others, then that is a gift that someone can give us. And remember, that feedback always comes through their lens just as much as through being accurate. So it's important to consider that it's a gift and to take it in, and then you decide if it fits. Now, known to self and unknown to others, that's your private life space. In a workshop, we're going to not poke and prod around in there. You get to share what you want. Once you share it, it's no longer private, but so you have the option. And the other thing is there's certain aspects of our personality that we sort of know, but we don't go around talking about. And then, of course, there's this unknown to self, known to others, called the unconscious. And we're not going to probe around in that. But there are these things like these unconscious drivers of our personality that we can become more aware of and then choose to share them with others, or at least choose to use them in our conscious decision making. So these are the basics of what we do in getting to the framework. So what are some of the ways? Well, and I haven't seen any questions, so are there questions? I guess not. Okay, so we have these multiple models, multiple lenses. That is something that we that emerged out of our work a long time ago, and it turns out that we use 3 usually, and then we have a 4th one that's emerged but hasn't been supported yet with materials. So the multiple models that we use, just different lenses we can use to filter out in different kinds of information and highlight other kinds of information. So one of them is interaction styles, and that's what this certification is about. Interaction styles is an energy pattern, and we have different kinds of energy patterns. We have some I'll talk to you about interaction styles in just a little bit. So it's how we tend to influence others and define relationships. Really important that it's about relationship definition, which influences our how we interact with others. Okay, so what's another model? Another lens is essential motivators, and essential motivators is what we call, what David Kersey called temperament. And we stopped using that term because we thought essential motivators really gets at the core of what this is. We have core needs and psychological values, and values. And these needs are so important that if we don't get those needs met, we go to great lengths to get them met. I first learned about these 4 patterns in the psychopathology class. 4 different ways of going crazy, we said, and 4 different patterns of that. And it takes a certain talent to go crazy a certain way. So these are strong drivers of our personality and how these patterns express. So we have 4 interaction styles that can express 4 different essential motivator patterns, and that can get us to 16 personality types or 16 holistic type patterns. And the resource we use is this book of self-discovery descriptions based on interviews. And we ask people one question: what's it like to be you? And then we narrowed it down to 1 page, ignored all the editor's things except really gross spelling errors, all the corrections, so that it is in the language, the syntax, the kinds of things that each of those types talk about. And we found they work even when English is a second language, and they seem to work cross-culturally. So that is where we get to. Now, if we want to understand each of those 16 personality patterns, we can look to Jung's model, Carl Jung's model of the Jungian functions, Jungian psychological type. And this is something we call cognitive styles, cognitive processes, and that's a pattern of the kind of information we tend to pay attention to, and the kinds of ways of organizing that information. And in this lens, we get a map for our type development, which is how our pattern unfolds and gets even richer over time. So this is a beautiful way of picking out different aspects that are relevant to different kinds of challenges people face, and giving them a framework that they can talk about that's easy to understand by starting with interaction styles. It's where I usually start with organizations because it's really safe, it's visible, it's actionable easily, and it can really heal some conflicts fairly quickly. And sometimes I start with essential motivators, but almost always that's where I start. Once in a while, I'll start with the cognitive stuff. Okay, so we have these, they all come, and I like having people know that we're going to talk today about 4 interaction styles, and know that that is one piece of the puzzle, that there are many other ways, and these are all integrated ways that I'm using in the background with you. All right.
I'll just say that you have got a very good book, Understanding and Applying Jung's Cognitive Processes, if people want to know more about the...
Yeah, that one's out of print.
It's sort of can be found on Amazon. This is the slightly elevated price, but it's
like $100 for something that, yeah.
No. I've got my eye on one for about maybe $30.
Okay, well, and then of course, where's the royalty? But nonetheless, okay.
I should be mentioning that. I want to get that, so I'll put the price up for me. So forget about that, folks.
All right. So with interaction styles, we have this booklet is a workbook, and so I'm just going to run through this a little bit about the pattern. And in our work, we use graphics to display the pattern. So this is what the pattern looks like. We are trying to divide this idea of energy, and what there is there's a drive behind the energy, and there's a core belief underlying it and an aim. And this drive is a psychophysiological drive. You feel it in the body, and you can see it in the way people are moving. And it's actually, you can shift the way you move and the pace at which you talk and convey the energy of one of the other patterns. Okay, so there's an appearance, characteristics that describe pattern. And then talents, and we describe the talents. And if you think about it, the talents are the wheels that help this arrow move smoothly. All right, so if we look at that with the Johari window, everybody can see the behaviors, right? Even you can notice behaviors if you stop it look for a moment on yourself. Unknown to self is talents, and we tend not to know our talents. We take those for granted. And unknown to others is this drive and the aim. So if you may not have a language for it, but you'll recognize it pretty quickly. So you kind of know. But then what we don't know is this core belief that's behind it. So that's the pattern. So what are the 4 patterns? Well, we use these names. And the challenge is when you name something, then it starts to get limited by the meanings that people make of things. For example, in charge doesn't mean the person in charge. In charge is an energy that says, I'm going to get things done. So they think it's worth the risk to go ahead and act or decide when people are in that energy or when that's their energy. They have a determined energy. They have quick decisions. That's what they prefer. And achievable result, because they're after that achievable result. So that's just the essence of the theme, kind of the essential qualities. Chart the course isn't always about being a whole detailed plan, but thinking ahead to anticipate what's going to happen. So there's this, it's worth the effort to think ahead and reach the goal. There's a focused energy, deliberate decisions, and a desired result. Okay, so that's, have a course of action of some kind and find a way to go around the roadblocks that are there. Get things going. It's worth the energy to involve everyone and get them to want to. It doesn't mean that they only get them going, but they want to have that involvement, that engaging, and it's really quite an engaging energy. And the kinds of decisions they like to make are somewhat consensual. This doesn't mean 100% agreement, but that on the heavyweight decisions, you have an opportunity to voice your objections and to give input. And they want an embraced result, so they don't. It's important that people really want to. And then we have behind the scenes, which is not always, you can lead with a behind the scenes style. So it isn't, none of these are about leaderships, they're just different styles. And for behind the scenes, that core belief is it's worth the time to integrate and reconcile many inputs. So wanting to get a lot of information and pull it together and then put it out there for people and let them decide. That's an open energy and making consultative decisions and getting the best result possible. Now, there are processes that these patterns have in common, and I'm not going to go into those today, but there are those who tend to be role directing, meaning that they're really comfortable telling people what to do, and that's the ones on the left, chart the course and in charge. Behind the scenes, you get things going, tend to have a preference to give information because they want that buy-in, they want agreement, and then later maybe tell you what to do. Okay, and then there's the initiating and responding dynamic, which is chart the course and behind the scenes tend to be responding in whether or not they're going to make the first move in an interaction, and in charge and get things going tend to be initiating, making the first move in defining a relationship. So those are things that dynamics, and then there's some diagonal ones, and we'll be having a whole session on just the dynamics. All right, so here's some tips. This was from a communication style link, left it in there. So first of all, just start observing energy patterns, and that will be indicative of the energy pattern someone's in at the moment, and pay attention to their energy patterns, and then start off being kind of neutral. Don't come off doing nothing, and don't come off telling people quite actively what you're doing. So, all right. Now, essential motivators, I'm not going to spend much time on that, but I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of the pattern. So this one is core psychological needs that are at the core and influence everything else about this pattern. And there are closely related values, talents that help scratch the itch that the needs create. Very important. We get energized when we're engaged with our talents, and that's true of all of the models, and especially true for essential motivators. And then there are some typical behaviors. And if we look at these with the Johari window, we see that the core needs are the things we don't know about. It's not in the curriculum for child rearing to talk about your core needs. Again, talents we often don't know. We take them for granted, but we haven't named them. And values are often things that we don't know till they're crossed. People don't know about them. So the essential motivators, there's the improviser. Now, this is a pattern that David Kersey called artisan. We found that didn't work quite as well. So we looked for some names that were very action-oriented. And so the needs then are the freedom to act now and to do something that has an impact. And the talent is tactics. And I can't tell you how sophisticated tactical intelligence is. It is just amazing with me how cleverly, quickly, and with the richness with which some of my improviser colleagues think about what to do and what to do next. And the stabilizer needs a responsibility and duty and to make a contribution, to have a place where they can make a contribution. Some of the early descriptions of stabilizer, Kersey called them the guardian, what they want to do is they want to bring stability so that the world goes on. And their talent is logistics, so they tend to make arrangements. Tactics are what do you do, what actions to take next, and logistics is seeing how those different arrangements need to be made, like what kind of roles do you need? What are some of the governance procedures that will make it stay in place? Who's going to do what when? All kinds of scheduling kinds of things, getting all the materials so things go right and things go wrong. Incredible talent. I have a little skill there, but not as much as I'd like, so I tend to get overly concerned with logistics because to try to make sure things go right and they don't go wrong, at least when I'm doing workshops. So incredible talent there. The theorist, which is my pattern, so I have a little bias there, but the core needs are to have knowledge and competence and to have mastery. And just to realize that this is true for all of us, we have all of these needs within us and everybody wants to be knowledgeable. And they don't want to be unknowledgeable, but they don't have a need for it. The strong psychological need, that psychological death if you feel like you don't know or that you're incompetent. And likewise for the improviser and the stabilizer, their core needs are what psychological death for them if they don't get those met. So for the theorist, the talent is strategy, and that's thinking of things that might come into play that interfere, that are going to cause a big disruption. And it's not what we think of as strategic planning. Good strategic planning will take all of these into account. Okay, so strategy is thinking of consequences. Here's where we need to go, and here's how all of the things, they'll often be in opposition to tactics or logistics because that's not what they want to think of first, people who have this theorist temperament. And the catalyst core needs are deep meaning and significance and unique identity. And the sense that out of this meaning and significance comes a sense of purpose. I think we're in a time where catalysts kind of have an edge on helping people figure out their purpose. And the talent is for diplomacy. And diplomacy is not the political sense, but saying things, communicating in a way that gets at resolving deeper issues or putting things in a way that people will really understand. So that's the talent for the catalyst, and I'm in awe of those with diplomatic talent as well. So those are the 4 patterns, and they have some processes. I'm not going to go into those. I just wanted to give you a sense of the essential motivators. Okay. And you start noticing these differences. You listen for what's behind their words. And then if you find yourself frustrated, think about how that other person's needs are not getting met. So some of the ways to work with that in relationships. And why are they doing what they're doing? Not why are they doing what they're doing, but why, with a great deal of respect for that why being very important. Okay, and so there are 4 ways to express the essential motivators, and we get to 16 personality patterns. And in most of the organizations where we've done this work, people tend to talk about, like, I'm an in-charge stabilizer, or I'm a behind-the-scenes theorist. Those things have real deep meaning, simple enough to grasp in an hour, the idea of the 4 interaction styles, rich enough to study for a lifetime. This is what is there behind all of that. And the practitioner needs to know all of these. If the practitioner doesn't know about them, then the practitioner is likely to mistake something and over stereotype. So it's important that you know these things, which is why I resisted doing an interaction style certification for years. But I realized that you don't have to have mastered the others as long as you know enough about them. Okay, and then there is the best fit cognitive pattern, and that gets us to what's often referred to with the type code. We have theme names, and that's the cognitive styles, or the iteration of the book that Ben mentioned is Understanding Yourself and Others, an Introduction to the Personality Type Code. We found that the other book was too complicated to use in workshops. So, all right, so now we have, 3 lenses, 16 personality patterns that we can understand from these different perspectives. Now, underneath all of that, there's a richness of the different cognitive processes, which are often referred to with Jungian terms like, well, let's just talk about me, behind the scenes theorist, but also I'm a designer theorizer. I lead with introverted thinking, so I'm always analyzing something to find the leverage point, looking for, checking for whether the criteria match and consistency and that kind of thing. Extroverted intuiting, which is seeing patterns, emerging patterns. Introverted sensing, which is that reviewing the past and what information is relevant. And then extroverted feeling is knowing what to say to people, to have them or do for people so that they feel comfortable and taken care of in a way. So these patterns and these cognitive dynamics is a very rich aspect that can really help you as a practitioner if you know all of that, but we're not going to go there today. And so this was just always ask yourself, am I expecting this person to be like me, or am I trying to be like them? Now, here's the pitch. Here are the resources. You can get these books on Radiance House, radiancehouse.com, or you can get them on Amazon. However, when you sign up for the workshop, we will send you these booklets. And if you're not in the United States, we'll have to send them very quickly to you. So anyway, I want you to have the booklet so that you can reference and understand a little more depth than we're going to cover in the workshop. Our intention is to do a certification in the other models as well, and at some point come together for some interactive stuff. But right now we're just starting where we can. So on Fridays, starting February 10th at 10 o'clock in the morning, Pacific time, that's when we'll be doing the workshops. Now, March 17th, there is no workshop. So we're skipping one because I have another webinar I'm involved in, and because you need some extra time and there is homework in between. So first thing we do is we ship you the booklets. You sign a license agreement and you receive electronically the facilitator guide sections for doing the interaction styles. So you will get this blueprint on how to facilitate. It's at least a start when you're a novice to have a guide, a scripted dialogue with activities that follow the adult learning process and how to debrief those. And you have a one-on-one session that we will do probably on Zoom. Skype is okay too. So, and you complete a little bit of pre-work. So the first session is February 10th. Now, what else is there? All right. The first 5 sessions, you're going to experience the self-discovery process. We'll talk about what we did, why we did it. We'll have application activities in the workshop. I plan on using Adobe Connect, which has quite a few different ways to interact. And in between, you will have assignments and things to do. My guess is those will take a couple of hours. Not a lot, depends on just how thorough you want to be. And then March 24th, you'll share with your colleagues what happened in your experience. So we'll do questions and answers, and we'll do a fair amount in breakout groups. So your requirement is that you have good audio connection and that you use a headset with a microphone. And we will be on the internet, not using the phone. That's unfortunate that doesn't seem to work as well for breakout groups with Adobe Connect. So anyway, then there will be some assessments to do to get your certificate. One of those things is you need to do a self-study where you write up how the model fits you and ways it doesn't, that kind of thing. And then we will send you electronically the simple PowerPoint for you to use as a basic to put together workshops. And even one-on-one sessions can be helped if you have some animated graphics. So there you go.